so thrilled. I wanted to thank Sophie so much for bringing me here. And I also wanted to thank my co-founder who started a nonprofit with me called Project Gogh. He couldn't be here tonight, but he wanted me to say hello. His name is John Slipko. And we started an organization that wants to do precisely what we're going to do tonight, and that is inspire people by the art. And return the connection that puts you in the moment where you're really in awe. And you know the word awesome? It sort of kind of like feels like hippie and, you know, but it's all over the Bible. If you read the Bible, it's all these awesome moments. So I hope we have an awesome time tonight. And I also wanted to thank my mother, who is here in the back. She's the acupuncturist in Beverly Hills, and she had saved me so many times. The only reason I'm standing in front of you is not because she gave birth to me, because she fixed me so many times. So thank you, Mom. And tonight, of course, we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject. It's a contradiction. We're going to be talking about that which we cannot see. So how can art show us what we can't see? And for that, I wanted to start with the very definition of art. So, of course, we've all used the word so many times, and raise a hand if you are an artist. It could be a designer, or it could be something that you love, the way you arrange your house. Raise a hand if you're an artist. Interested in art, love art, mentioned the word before in your life? Okay. What does that mean, art? And one day I actually asked myself, and I went to look at the etymology, and I was shocked that practicing artist my whole life, teaching about it, I didn't really know what it means. And actually, art in English comes from the word are, to be. So it is about being. And what's so amazing about, here we see a reproduction of Rembrandt's self-portrait. That portrait had seen that people who died were not here, and that portrait will see the people who haven't been born yet. And in our moment, when we look at it, all of us are connected. Right, so already we have, by definition, art is a moment where those who are invisible are sitting at the dinner tonight. Right? All who come and look at it, and all those who will come and look at it again, we're all connected through this portal. So that's something to remember. The other interesting word is the portrait itself. And portrait comes from the Latin word to protract something. To protract something is to bring forth that which was not visible a moment ago. And that will be our link tonight. And I hope that we all leave transformed tonight. We get the new eyes and we start seeing, because the only way we can see, we cannot see what we do not know. And art allows us to learn and see in a new way. I wanted to also thank tonight the research assistant on Project Gogh for my nonprofit, Jitsi Banmeli Sitter, and she's sitting in the back. And so this lecture was never spoken before. It's not written, you cannot read it, it's all in here, and it's directly prepared for you. For weeks I've been thinking about this. So strap your seatbelts, we're going on a journey. So we know what art means, but where does art come from? And that's the question that a first man who wrote in first human encyclopedia in Western European history, whose name is Pliny, 2,000 years ago, he asked that same question when he art, where does it come from? And so he said, oh, it comes from the Greeks. The Greeks must have invented it. And he recounts this myth that art comes from two things. It comes from love and it comes from death. And that's going to be our thread that we take today, because love and death, it's something that we all experience, but we don't know how to find it. In some ways, it could be fearful or exciting, but we don't know how to deal with it. Art deals with it for us. And here's the story. You can see that this is a painting from 18th century. It was a very popular subject for artists because they wanted to tell you, why are we doing this? Why should art even matter? And of course, if this was a Hollywood film, you would have the most beautiful woman playing the part, the most handsome man. And here, they fall in love. You can imagine what happened before. I'm not going to tell you. But now she finds out that he has to go. And probably he has to go to war, and probably he's going to die, and probably she's never going to see him again. So what does she do? They're in this beautiful setting, like here tonight, and she observes that his body casts a shadow on the wall. And she somehow, I love that it's the woman who gives birth to the art. Somehow she's possessed with her love, and she picks up charcoal and she traces his shadow. And so art is born by tracing somebody's presence when we know they're going to be absent in a moment. There's a relationship between, again, here now and what's going to be happening next. So I want you to hold on to this idea. Now we're going to go on a little journey. And has anybody been to Egypt? Raising hand of you. Okay, let's all go right now. Okay, so we're going to Egypt. And you will see that this is what we call a mummy portrait. And what's very strange, we understand that these are the wrappings and we have the portrait within it, but what's strange is that that person that's inside it looks like they came from this year. They look so contemporary. In fact, it looks like somebody painted it, you know, yesterday, right? So what's up? These are 2,000-year-old portraits. These portraits were discovered or rediscovered in the 19th century, and somehow miraculously about 1,000 of them survived on the west bank of the Nile in the region that's called Fayoum. And they didn't know what to call them, so they called them Fayoum portraits. So if you go to a museum, you'll know these are the Fayoum portraits. So I wanted to point out just how contemporary they look. I mean, this is just eerie. They're painted on wooden boards and they stare at you intensely. They're really asking you to connect with them. And the way they're painted is really interesting. So we already know they're in wood, but they're actually painted with what we call encaustic technique. Encaustic means that it's actually wax melted and mixed with pigment. When you mix your pigment with wax, you actually can take metal tools. Imagine like dentist tools, like little spatulas. And if you heat up your tools, imagine like candle wax. You can begin to mix. And you start seeing this incredible kind of texture. This looks like Van Gogh almost, right? This doesn't look like a 2,000-year-old painting. The reason they also look so realistic is because though these portraits are found in Egypt, they're painted with an ancient Greek technique. And there was a painter who lived 400 BC, 2,400 years ago, whose name was Apelles. And Apelles was considered so good, he was called the painter of the souls. And though this is painted 400 years later, it's painted in Egypt, which is occupied by the Romans, who are carrying the tradition from Greek painting. So you're actually seeing multiculturalism. You're seeing Egyptian tradition of mummification that we'll talk in just a moment. You have the Greek painting and you have the Roman subjects. So we think of art, right? Art is something to hang on the wall. These paintings were not meant to hang on the wall. They were meant to become you. The Egyptians believed that when a person dies, their soul disconnects from the body, and because the body is mortal, it will leave, and you will be lost forever. They tried to mummify the body to preserve it, but then through this Roman and Greek connection, there was a new development. There was this idea born that you need this mirror of the face, that you can't preserve the face so well for the soul to recognize it. And so they decided that if you paint a portrait, the soul, in the moment that it leaves your body, it will look back and it'll say, there I am. And it's going to go back inside that wooden board and live inside it forever. So something that's invisible becomes visible through a portrait practice. Now imagine, a person is dying. You call what? You call still the priest in Egypt or somebody who's performing the ritual. You call the doctor, make sure if you can help them or ease their pain, and you call an artist, right? The three of them are working together in this magical moment. For if you don't do it then, too late, the soul will be gone. Later on, it is actually attached. The face was pushed back in the body, and the portrait took place where your face would be. They would wrap around the mummy, put it in this, imagine a gold sarcophagus attached to it, and a little hole for the face to look out. And then this would not be buried. This would be your relative. Right now, as you would be having dinner, grandma could be here, and you could be asking her questions, Look, something at work is not going well. What should I do? So the idea of living with the dead was really interesting in this time, 2,000 years ago. But it went through the art. Again, that moment that I wanted to talk about. Past, present, and future, the art being in the moment. This idea will take through as we move forward in time, and we're going to jump to Rembrandt. And everybody knows that he was famous for painting self-portraits. He painted himself at least once a year. What I love about Rembrandt is his sense of wit and humor. One of his very first self-portraits you could see here locally at the Getty Museum. It's a tiny little painting on a copper plate. And you recognize him across the room. But what's amazing about it, when you get closer to it, you see something that you almost never see in art. He's laughing. And he's about, in that portrait, he's about, I think, 21 years old. So it's one of his first self-portraits. His very last self-portrait, if not the last one, we see him laughing again. So laughter and humor brackets his life. Probably two different types of laughs. When you're in the beginning of your life and the end of life, you kind of understand things differently. But here we have something very intense and something very different. Rembrandt is staring at you. And unlike the Fayum portraits that were also staring at us, he's asking you a question. I want you to look at his eyebrows and his expression, and it's like he's like, come on, see something here, connect to something here. And I wish we were standing in front of the original. We should take a field trip. It's in Amsterdam in the Rijksmuseum. Shall we go? Yeah. That would be good. Why not? And when you stand in front of it and you actually go back to show it to you, you will be looking at it and you'll be pulling your hair and saying, what are you trying to tell me? What is it? And I'm going to show you what he had hidden within the painting. And I wonder if you could see that there is a book here, kind of a scroll that's been turned into a book. And do you see this object? This is a dagger, correct. Can you see it? A dagger or a sword? So we go back, and even though it's kind of a faint image, so you can imagine it's sort of here, and it isn't visible when you stand in front of it because it's so shiny, has a lot of varnish. So you have to do the dance and kind of get in a really good position where all of a sudden you see it. And in that moment you go, oh, what's happening here? So what Rembrandt has done, he has painted himself as a saint, and he has painted himself as Saint Paul. And Saint Paul, what's so amazing about him is that he wrote a lot, and he wrote amazing letters actually from jail about what he saw as truth, and he was trying to communicate the truth. And he was martyred by the Romans by being decapitated with a sword. And this very sword that killed him became for Christian tradition and for pictorial tradition a sword, what they call the soul of truth. So the very sword that killed him is going to be the sword of truth. All these letters and all this communication that he wanted to send out. Now, I'm not Christian, and I look at this painting, and I look at Rembrandt, and I wonder what is that spoke to him, because we know he wasn't Catholic, and we don't even know if he was Protestant. There's very ambiguous stories about, nobody really can pinpoint his religion. We know that for most of his life he actually lived in Jewish quarters, consulted with a lot of Jewish scholars, used Hebrew in his work. I'm not implying he's Jewish, but it's not clear-cut what his position is. So we have to sort of leave the religion behind and really think about what is Rembrandt saying here if we don't think religion, if we don't actually think Christ, if we don't actually think dogma, right? And here, in a way, if you think an artist who's standing in front of you, who's painting this painting in 61, just a few years before he dies, by the time that his loved ones passed away, he's lost his wife, he's lost his amazing studio and his clients because he went bankrupt, and he's left with pretty much nothing. You can see in this painting already, he's almost wearing rags. So what is that sword that's piercing his heart? It's what's left. And the sword, if you think of the sword of truth, it is the kind of martyrdom of an artist. You can skin me alive, you can decapitate me, bankruptcy, house in Beverly Hills, forget it, you know, don't matter. I will still paint the way I believe in. There will be a day in 2017, there's 30 people are going to come and look at my art and love it. I don't care. So that sword there, that sword of truth that we didn't see a moment ago, becomes so visible and becomes truly the heart of this painting. He used an artist beret, and actually when we think of this Bohemian artist smoking with a beret, it comes from Rembrandt. Rembrandt insisted on wearing a hat. The reason that he is wearing a hat here and insisted, there was a painting guild in Amsterdam. And you started as an apprentice and you worked really hard to become the master. And if you were a master painter, then you got the big commissions. Then the rich and famous came through. And one of the things that you are allowed to do when you become a master is to wear a hat. And that comes from the tradition of slavery. And slavery will come back as a topic for us again. As a free man, as a master, you get to wear a hat. So he insists in almost every self-portrait to wear that. But here, notice that the hat itself, or this turban, or this strange beret, is almost like the saint's halo. Surrounds him with light, with glow. Illuminates this painting. Right? Where's the light coming from? And look at the size. Look at how he's trying to make sure that this painting isn't dead. It's alive. It's like the Fayum portraits. There's a spirit in it communicating to you. Don't bury it. Hang it up, talk to it like to the grandma that we talked about. Has anybody seen this image before? So this is a beautiful painting by Hans Holbein. It is roughly the size as you see it on the screen. It hangs in the National Museum in London, and that's our next destination if we were to take the trip. And there is so much symbolism within this image, it would take us a lifetime to unpack it. Rather, instead, I want to show you how unorthodox it is, how surprising it is, and the most amazing thing that ever happened perhaps in the history of art. So here we have the two main subjects, and there's all kinds of objects arranged in front of them or behind them. We see symbols of knowledge, measurement. You can measure time, solstice, stars. There's globes, celestial, there's music. All kinds of ways that you can understand what's around us. But has anybody noticed anything strange about it yet? This thing is so bizarre. Salvador Dali right now is so excited, right? But we have to look at the date. It's 1533. What is this abstract shape taking up half the painting, levitating there? So what you see here is an invention in Renaissance, and it has to do with perspective. When the perspective was reinvented or remembered by the Renaissance artists, they realized that it's not just allowing you to construct the space, but to actually alter the space and to show you something, how your eye works, how vision works, and how your brain works. This painting, you stand in front of it and you don't see. But when you look away and you're just about to turn away and you're at a certain angle, you get a perspective which allows you to reconstruct what you're supposed to see. And this is called anamorphosis, changing, morphing what in perspective. So let me show you. This is a shape, and as you walk away and get a perfect perspective aligned with it, at a perfect angle, and actually, if you want to ever try it, even maybe after I'm done, if you go to the edge, or even if you take a book, a reproduction, and look in front of your computer, if you flatten yourself with a screen, you'll see it happen right in front of your eyes. So incredible. But what's so interesting here, why would Holbein, and I want you to think about it for a moment, why would Holbein place a skull in the bottom of this painting with its important ambassadors and the symbols of knowledge? What comes to mind? What would you find?
We are mortal.
So that we are all mortal, right? It's death. And that is what everybody tells us. In art historical language, they want to be fancy and they call it memento mori, moment of death, to remind you no matter how wealthy you are, how much you know, that you're nothing compared to God. You're having a time limit. But what I'd like to suggest to you, there could be another message. And we started by talking a little bit in the beginning about death and how we cannot see what we don't know. And here perhaps there is a comment that we might be fearing what's after, but we don't really understand it. It might as well be a big blur, right? What's really happening, we will find out, but it's probably not how we envisioned it. So I think the artist is really commenting here, rather than death, the afterlife, what is possible. And if death is in the very front, I will show you what's in the very back. It's kind of interesting. Right behind the curtain, you get a glimpse of a crucifixion. Because the hint of a crucifixion, it comes from Egyptian, you can find almost every religion, every tradition, it's the idea of resurrection. It's the idea of coming back. So while you have death in the front, here perhaps behind the veil, there is more truth. Perhaps the art will help you to see it. Perhaps we will all discover it one day and we won't fear it anymore. Really remarkable. You getting goosebumps yet? Okay. So, Dali, yes, I twirl my mustache, right? Salvador Dali. And Dali was incredibly knowledgeable, and he's using oil techniques which are very traditional, and he's also thinking about vision. So in the front, we actually have a person, and that's really important. I want you to focus on that woman first, because what is she doing? She's looking. And so this is a comment on you. You're looking at this painting. This painting is about you and the vision, and what happens in your eye and what happens in your brain. But you really have to think what happens here. So the main character, does anybody know who the main character here is? Who do you see in this composition that kind of stands out in this group of people?
Spanish women?
Yeah, you see the Spanish nuns? They're the main characters. They seem to be coming forward and addressing you. But you're absolutely wrong. It's Voltaire. The Spanish women are the eyeballs of Voltaire. You see, their collars are his nose. Their aprons right here is his chin. You see him? This is called the slave market, or the disappearing bust of Voltaire. So you were all, of course, right. He wanted you to say that. And what Dali is using here is what's called the double image technique. He's using two images to construct one. The problem with that, your brain can only register one at a time. You can either see the women or you can see Voltaire. You cannot see both. You always have to go back and forth. This is a sculpture by Udon in 1778. So Dali was referring to a portrait by another great artist, a sculpture that was so famous in France and all over the world, because this was the man who was speaking the truth. He was actually speaking against religion and independence and against slavery. In fact, let's read his quote. Does a dog need another dog, or a horse another horse? No animal depends on any other of its species. Man, however, has received the divine inspiration that we call reason. And what has it wrought? Slavery almost everywhere returned. And so it's so interesting as we look at the image and start to decipher it. Within this nuns, what we see is a slavery market. And we see men and women for sale, stripped naked, offered like meat. So we go back to the image and we'll see it. You see them treated almost just thrown on the ground. But this image is full of surprises. And we have to unpack it as we look at it. For instance, here's a still life, right? Here is the bust, and this is the pedestal for the bust. So here he plays with a double image, repeating it. And we have fruit, a bowl of fruit. But if you notice that there's two people embracing, and this part almost looks like it's becoming a body part, or part of that image, is full of images that are connected, playing with your mind. Here within the architecture, do you see the two openings and the mouth? It almost looks like a Swiss cheese, right? But it reminds us of an Anamorphosis image we saw in Holbein. So there's a play between the distorted skull and the kind of a skull in the face that we see developed in Voltaire's bust. All of this is consciously created inch by Dali. And it's all about what you're going to do with it and how you're going to perceive this. Your vision. And hopefully that it will turn you towards compassion. Here art is really teaching us about Voltaire's words. And Voltaire is silent. One question I have for you to think about, I have no answer, but why do you think Dali calls it disappearing bust of Voltaire? Why not appearing bust of Voltaire? I have no answer. I wonder if anybody has a thought.
Because you can never really see it for too long.
Maybe because you can't hold on to it and it's
hard to hold on to the image once you see it.
Once you see the image, it's sort of there for a brief moment and then it goes, right? Is it because men like this are very hard to find? Men and women, humanity, is it the disappearing humanity? We have kind of a play here again. If you think of Holbein, the skull was appearing towards us. Here again, as we talk about the image, is only briefly here and disappears. Very interesting. I'm sure he was thinking about Holbein as he was painting this image. Something to keep in mind. If you come up with a genius answer, call me. You have one?
The image of the man who wants to give freedom and abolish slavery is disappearing behind the slave market.
So I will repeat it. So we have an image of a man who dreams to give freedom to people, disappears behind the slave market. The reality versus the dream, the call to action versus what he's seeing, right? It's almost being inside. If you notice that it's kind of a joke on Dali's part, he puts the nuns in his head. And of course, that's like Voltaire's nightmare. He hates Christian dogma. I will read you one quote about Christianity that Voltaire writes that's just amazing. Do you want it in French or in English or both?
Both.
Both, okay, we'll do it both. Because in French it sounds so much better. La notre religion est sans contredit la plus ridicule, la plus absurde et la plus sanguinaire qui a jamais infecté le monde. Our religion is assuredly the most ridiculous, the most absurd, and the most bloody religion which has ever infected this world. That's Voltaire. And of course, Dali, what does he put? He puts the nuns to put up his face, right? This is Dali laughing. I think this could be probably applied to any religion that oppresses, right? So this is not singular. It's Voltaire trying to be a daredevil, right? Okay, so we've learned from Dali about double image. And now we have, I think, a little bit of a dessert. No, that one? Okay. So this painting is a real surprise to get here. First of all, we all know it. We've all seen it. It hangs at the Getty Museum. Raise your hand if you stood in front of it in Los Angeles. Raise your hand if you have a book with it at home. Okay. And what is it called? The irises. Whoever gave this title is just absolutely ridiculous. And I wanted to challenge the reason that I bring it here for a very, very special reason. And that is, when we see a celebrity, this is like if somebody really, really famous right now walked in here. Give me a name. Somebody, Voltaire. Voltaire or Dali walked in here. If Dali walked in here, we'd only see his mustache and we'd faint and we'd want to have the autograph, but we wouldn't actually see the person behind it. The same happens with famous art. We know it's irises, we go and see it, we photograph in front of it, we're happy that we saw it, but did we really see it? What is invisible in this painting? So I wanted to use one of the most famous paintings to share with you how much more here we can experience. And first, you cannot say the word iris. So let's make a little list. What else is in this painting that you see?
Body shapes.
Body shapes. Very interesting.
Sunflowers.
See kind of almost like sunflowers or some other very different material in the background. What else? And don't worry, I have time. Sunflowers, other type of flowers, what else? Aha! Why is this different? Let's use psychology. What's happening in this painting? Why is this different? You could talk about composition, color, or deeper meaning. Anything you like. What's different? What's it doing there?
It's not reproduced.
It's not reproduced, it's one of a kind. Did Van Gogh run out of color? What happened there? Let's look to help us a little bit at the composition itself. Have you noticed that there is movement in this painting? As if there's a strange gust of wind. You can almost feel it on your skin as you stand longer in front of it. And if you could almost, this sounds really ridiculous, but could you show me with your bodies which way you're feeling the wind? If you were to tell me. Can you feel the entire painting is not still, it's in movement. And if we look at the larger composition, look at the blue color. Just blue itself. Do you see a diagonal? And do you see one right here? And it's taking us again to the same destination. If you look at each individual brushstroke, this is supposed to be dirt and the ground, right? And it's amazing. When you go to the Getty Museum, you could just spend a day just looking at this dirt. Every color is depicted here. It's scrumptious. It's amazing. And Van Gogh actually had said that when he saw Rembrandt's painting in Rijksmuseum, that he wishes he could spend a week with just a glass of water absorbing it. And here, if we look at some of the Rembrandt self-portraits, we see the magnifying skin and texture, almost as if Van Gogh is blowing up what he had seen and what he wanted to remember. But there's another way that he's thinking both about this movement and about Rembrandt. I need to remind you that Rembrandt's name is not Rembrandt. It's just his first name. Rembrandt Harmenson van Rijn is his real name. And what is your name?
Barbara.
Barbara. So imagine when we say Barbara, we only think of you from now on. And this is what Rembrandt is. It was a common name. All of us turn our heads when we hear Rembrandt. It's amazing. He really wanted to establish himself as the first name that you will remember forever. And when we say Van Gogh, what's his first name? Vincent. The reason that he drops Van Gogh in his signature many times is because he's thinking about one man, and that is Rembrandt. And if you notice down below here, there is a signature. And here's our detail. Vincent, right? But there's something so amazing about it. Do you see? It's on the diagonal. Who signs art on the diagonal? Nobody. You could look for hundreds of years and there are rarely any other painting, perhaps never, that you could find another one where the name is not written straight, like Rembrandt would have done. The reason here it's on the diagonal, let's go back for a second. Again, do you see what happens? We go back here. So now that you have a little bit more background, what can we say about the relationship between all of these flowers, the wind, the direction, and this white one? What else can we add to it? Purity? So in a sense, you do have this kind of purity. And I want you to also notice, is that flower bending with the wind?
No.
So only one. It's like Rembrandt with a sword. It's not bending. It's pure. It's fragile, but it's almost leaning towards the other way. Roberta says, this is a painting about humanity. We're all the same, but we can also be an individual. And this is this one individual that's able to stand out and stand for what they again believe or how they are. In this sea of blue, maybe these blue-collar workers or wherever they are, all the same, all bending to the wind. We have one voice in this chorus that is different. And now I will tell you where and how Van Gogh made this. This is made 1 year before he dies. in an insane asylum, where he checks himself in because he has phobias. He's afraid to be by himself. He's afraid to be in the dark. He's afraid he'll do something irrational. He hears voices, and he wants help. And he has very little place to go. Of course, it's 19th century, so he goes to this insane asylum / hospital, which is called Saint Remy. And there we can also travel, well, they'll show you Van Gogh's room. The reason we can say so much about this experience, because he writes a few times a day, daily or even more than daily, 2 times a day, to his brother, describing what it's like. And he says, these rooms are so tiny, they lock us up. They don't allow us out. I'm painting in my little room for days. It's gray. The food has cockroaches. It's unedible. I try to just drink and eat bread. And they even put a very tiny window, and they even put prison bars on the window. And he painted most of his beautiful images through those prison bars with the beautiful garden that he saw down below. He omitted the bars, and he shows you his vision beyond. And this is what he writes. This I will suggest to you, Van Gogh. I'm struggling with all my energy to master my artwork, telling myself that if I win this, it will be the best lighting conductor, the art will be the best lighting conductor for the illness. I take great care of myself by carefully shutting myself away. It's selfish, if you like, not to become accustomed to my companions in misfortune here instead, and to go to see them. But anyway, I feel none the worse for it, for my work is progressing, and we have need of that, for it's more than necessary that I do better than before, which wasn't sufficient. So he actually discusses in the letter the very thing that you observe, that he shuts away himself from the others. He feels different even though they share the misery, and he's on a mission to tell the truth about what he sees. Yes. But what I'd like to bring us back is to the Van Gogh's irises, and how unfortunate that the painting is titled Irises, and how much more there is. And do you see it the same way as a moment before? It's as if all this invisible, that was invisible, the story that takes a whole film to tell, it's all in the painting. All you have to do is stand in front of it, and the work of art, just like those balloon portraits, the soul of it will speak to us. And there's so much more that we could talk about, but it brings me to a thought that I wanted to conclude with. And here we skip to Oscar Wilde. And of course he was a great daredevil and a witty man. And he says something that's really incredible. And we'll look at Rembrandt's portrait, who is also a witty and great artist. And Oscar Wilde says, the true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible. And so I wanted to come a full circle and talk and think about for a moment what that means. And it is not what death would look like and love would look like. It's actually each other. When we look at each other, it's our skin, it's our presence, it's how we interact, it's the here and now that's mysterious. This is the mystery right in this room. Every flower that you see here, every person, every conversation you had, nothing is insignificant. Oscar Wilde says, don't go look for great philosophers. Look just with your eyes. It's back to the looking, right? It's on the surface that you will find the invisible. And it's really remarkable. In conclusion, I also wanted to mention, I forgot to tell you, I know Sophie had mentioned that I'm also a painter and I participate in this tradition, and I have a large exhibition right now on view. This is just a preview for you to look. It's at UCLA, and it opens October 26th. And I would like to invite everybody to join for the opening if you can. If you can't, I know perhaps with Sophie we were thinking about doing a very special visit that we could talk about the art together. The art was actually created as part of a new series that was hanging at UCLA during the time of between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that period of time is called the Days of Awe. And during the days of awe, what's amazing about this experience, you're really supposed to go inside yourself and to think about all the connections with the world. Were they right? Where did you go wrong? What can you rebuild? How do you restore your relationships? It's really not about the connection to God. It's really about the connection to yourself and to the others. And this body of work was created to heighten this experience. And there was actually services with 400 people held during those 10 days. Traditional conservative services where visual art is not allowed. This is the first time in history that paintings participated with the bringing out of the Torah and some of the chanting. And for me, this was a breathtaking moment. Really thinking about beyond the image, that this is not like we hear in the Bible, the graven image, something that's forbidden, but there's something invisible that it can open up that will help you to connect with yourself. So I hope that I'll see everybody at the opening. I also wanted to mention that I brought, if anybody wants to learn more about our projects, as you walk out, I brought flyers about Project Awe. Again, Project Awe stands for this awesomeness, but it's also for the aesthetics of Western esotericism, for the various esoteric traditions that inform the art that we have forgotten, and how we can look at paintings like Rembrandt and learn again what we had forgotten and be inspired. So I wanted to thank everybody, and I'm happy